any matters not included in the motion to go into the executive session occurred during the executive session in violation of the open meetings law, I ask that you state your concerns now. Hearing none, I'd ask that everyone rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, on item number 4, we have one appointment to consider for Planning Commission, and are you taking the lead on that, Cindy?
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much. There has been Stephen Yoxheimer, who was most recently appointed to the Planning Commission, submitted his resignation at their last meeting, and so we began to advertise, and we received one application from someone that many of you may know, and that's Phil Mella. Phil's here this evening. A copy of his application and his CV are included in your packet. He's happy to answer any questions you might have of him, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the process.
All right. Could you sign it? All right. Mr. Mella.
Yes, sir.
Would you like to come up and say a few words, and members of council here might want to ask you a few questions?
Absolutely, and thank you for your time and consideration. I really don't have a lot of prepared remarks to make. The application and CV will probably just stand with respect to my application for the Planning Commissioner position. So I would just ask for any questions you might have, and we'll proceed from there.
All right, thank you. John?
You have been on the Planning Commission earlier?
No, City Council.
City
sir.
Council?
Yes, sir.
What years?
2002 to 2008.
Okay. All right, so you know how all this works then?
I do.
Good. And still you're here. Okay.
Lessons are hard sometimes.
Ken, did you have something?
I would just say what a lot of people ask me: why? Why? You know, what's the motivation to get back involved? And I greatly
Certainly.
appreciate it. Don't take me wrong.
Absolutely. Well, I have a little more time. I retired from the University of Colorado Health in December. And so after 3.5 decades in health management and insurance, and I was on council when I was working, but I do have more time. So I wanted to kind of become reconnected with the community, its workings. I have a deep concern for this community, having lived here for 16 years with my wife. And I'm interested in what's going on in the process, and obviously planning is an integral part of that. And so having been on council, I only kind of peripherally saw the planning process. I wasn't on the Planning Commission. So this will give me an opportunity to see that aspect of it and play a small role in the process of city operations.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I'll just make a comment that usually it's Planning Commission then Council, so
right.
You're kind of doing it the other way around. So, but I appreciate the fact that you want to serve, and I know that your experience will be of great benefit to the Planning Commission. So,
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
thank you. All right. So, Cindy, I know in the past we've done ballots, but I don't know if that's necessary here.
I don't think it is, but if that's your pleasure, you can certainly do that.
I don't think we need to do that. If somebody wants to make a motion, we can move this along.
Move to accept the applicant for Planning Commission.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Cindy?
Thank you. Brevetto?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
And Cindy, I understand that you're ready to
I am.
issue the oath of office.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Phil Mella,
I, Phil Mella,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Colorado,
and the state of Colorado,
the charter and ordinances
the charter and ordinances
of the City of Woodland Park,
of the City of Woodland Park,
and that I will faithfully perform
and that I will faithfully perform
the duties of the office of member
the duty of the office of member
of the Woodland Park Planning Commission,
of the Woodland Park Planning Commission,
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I'm about to enter.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then that one's for me. And I think Sally has a gift
I
for
see.
you.
So
Yeah.
I'll just take this as mine.
Yes, that's yours. Thank you very much for
Thank you, Cindy.
volunteering.
A little late reading material there.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving along to item 5. I believe we have one deletion this evening. Cindy?
We do. We would request that agenda item 8A, which is ordinance number 1212, be removed from the agenda to be presented back at a later time when some more details are available.
Does that require a action on our part, or?
Please.
Okay.
Move to remove item 8A, ordinance number 1212 on initial posting, to be heard at a later date.
Second.
Is the date
I know.
certain? Okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second to remove item 8A. Cindy?
Thank you. Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Rivetto?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
All right, moving on to item 6 is the consent calendar. 2 items: approving the minutes of the March 6th regular meeting and approving the February 2014 statement of expenditures and authorizing the mayor to sign the warrants and payments thereof. Any questions of council?
I have a correction under 7A, page 3 of the minutes. In the second paragraph, the first sentence, Councilmember Schaefer reminded council that a special work session was held with the City Council and the Planning Commission earlier this year. That should be in September of last year.
Thank you. We'll correct that.
Any other corrections or questions on the consent calendar? If not, I would accept
Move
the
to
motion.
approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar with the one correction noted. Cindy?
Thank you. Harvey?
Yes.
Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Rivetto?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
We have no unfinished business this evening. With the deletion of 8A, we have no ordinances on initial posting, so that moves us into item number 9A under public hearings. That is to consider ordinance 1209 to amend chapters 1806, 1809, and 1833 of the Woodland Park Municipal Code to provide for accessory dwelling units. And to that, we'll turn to our planning director, Sally Riley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Good evening.
While Sally is doing that, I'd like to recognize John DeVoe, who is the chairperson of the Planning Commission, and Jeff Watson, who's the vice chair of the Planning Commission, and thank them for their good work on drafting this ordinance and for appearing here this evening.
Thank you for that. My intent this evening is to do a quick review and to help answer some of the questions that were brought up at the last meeting and in between that time. So this evening is the public hearing, so there will be public comment taken on this ordinance 1209. And as mentioned earlier, we had several meetings with the Planning Commission as well as the first reading for the City Council. Tonight is the final hearing. The benefits for accessory dwelling units are many, but specifically for our changing demographics, Many people are looking to house either parents, aging parents that can age in place with their family, or even college students or younger adults who want to still live with their parents. It allows them to have a habitable space within their home and have a full kitchen, because recall, the only difference with an accessory dwelling unit is that it allows for a full kitchen that includes a stove. So it's a conversion in a home to allow for a habitable space, and there are many criteria or standards that will be enforced to have a legal accessory dwelling unit. Oftentimes, these have been referred to as mother-in-law units. They also do allow for some people to be able to rent out space and therefore allow them to supplement their mortgage and stay in their home. We also have a very large demand for rental units at this point in time, with our not only increasing senior demographic, but the Charis Bible College is increasing an influx of students. So we did look at lots of communities, and many communities do have some form or another allowing for an ADU. You have in your packet a comparison table that specifically looked at Teller County, Glenwood Springs, Golden, Colorado Springs, and Denver. Even within our area, Manitou Springs, Monument, and Fountain have some provision of some sort in their code, their zoning regulations. And Ms. Harvey asked if we could look at covenants in the area, and I'm going to show you a map of that. But first, the ordinance begins with the whereases or the recitals, and that pretty much lays out why we're doing this. And then the next section talks about the specific definition for an accessory dwelling unit. And again, the Planning Commission did not feel it was wise to have detached cottage-type units to start out with. Instead, they thought it would be best to start with a habitable space that would be contained within the home as it exists, or allow for an addition to accommodate that to the existing home. Or the third way is to allow for an existing detached garage if they were to improve the upper level of the garage as a carriage house used to function years ago. So what is not included in this ordinance is a detached cottage separate from the home. We felt that might have an effect on the character of the neighborhood. That was just too extreme at this point. So that's the definition for an accessory dwelling unit, and then they will be permitted by right within the suburban residential and the urban residential zoning districts. And then in the commercial districts, they're only permitted conditionally, that is within an existing single-family home that's located either in the neighborhood commercial, community commercial, central business district, or a PUD. This is the map that shows the hatch lines of subdivisions that currently have covenants that address design for various regions within Woodland Park. So you can see it's mainly the newer neighborhoods that have been subdivided recently, and then the older neighborhoods that are toward the core part of town do not have existing covenants that address design.
Sally, if I could interrupt now, I have a question for our city attorney. I asked for that to illustrate how many areas of the city would be eligible either by right or by conditional use that could possibly have an accessory dwelling unit under the new ordinance. It's kind of like when we talked about allowing poultry in the city. There's very few places left on the map that this could occur. I brought the covenants for the neighborhood that I live in. I live off of Majestic Parkway in Paradise Estates, filing number 10. And my covenant says, shall be used for single-family residential purposes only. Only one single-family residential building may be constructed on any residential lot. Aaron, would that be then interpreted that our covenants would not allow an accessory dwelling unit?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think typically what I see in the covenants, and I guess what I would have thought would have been there, would be a provision that says you won't have any rentals, secondary home sort of rentals. And that to me is the clearer statement for what would disallow this. That I think is maybe subject to a little bit of interpretation.
Okay. Thank you.
And just a point of clarification as well, just because there are covenants and homeowners associations doesn't necessarily mean that ADUs would not be allowed. I would suggest to you that when these covenants were written, they probably weren't contemplated, and so they're probably not included. So a question I would have for Aaron is, can homeowners associations rewrite their covenants?
Yes, that was my next question.
And that's always the case. You're limited only by the provisions in your covenants that allow amendments to them.
Thank you.
And I think if Sally had had more time, she could have done a more thorough analysis on your questions. And perhaps that's something you'd like her to do, regardless of the outcome here this evening.
Ken?
Just one quick question, Sally. We're talking accessory dwelling units and, you know, above the garage and attachment, but we're also including in that description, aren't we, into a finished out lower level that somebody may choose to rent out also?
Yes, yes. So inside the home, it may be
Correct.
a basement. It may actually be an attic.
It doesn't have to have a separate entry, though.
Does not have to have a separate entry.
Okay. Thank you.
Bob?
Yeah. I'm the chairman of our Architectural Control Committee in our subdivision, and earlier this year we had a problem with somebody having renovated their bottom floor for it looked like a bunch of college students. And you rightfully crossed out the stove, and that is the only difference. Our homeowners association didn't, in a sense, want to have what you could now term an ADU, but as a result of what happens tonight, when we have our annual meeting in April, I will go back to them and say, hey, we have this new opportunity. Do we want to amend our covenants to allow it to happen? Because personally, I would like to be able to have that option to, my basement, finished basement, to be able to have something like that. Like you say, extra income is always useful. But that, I think each of the homeowners association are probably going to have to address that individually and change their covenants if they want to allow this.
And staff would be happy to help educate the homeowners associations to let them understand what very limited and strict criteria we have in place in order to manage them.
I appreciate that.
So, Gary, I know you have a question. I'm going to let you ask your question, but I'm going to say that Sally's probably got more presentations, so we're probably asking questions that she's getting ready to address, but that's okay. You've waited, and everyone else has got to ask questions. So fire away.
If we do nothing, what's to prevent someone to put a kitchen or a stove in their basement right now? Is there anything prohibiting that?
Yes, they would be in violation of the zoning regulations and of the building code. Because if you were to add a stove, whether it's a gas stove or a stove that would require a 220 outlet, they would be adding a improvement to that home without a building permit.
I mean, can't get a building permit to do that?
No,
Okay.
because it's in violation of our zoning code right now. So we would not allow for that building permit to be issued. Okay, moving on.
Go ahead, Sally.
The purpose statement, which emphasizes the benefits. And Section B talks about requiring a permit, so any new accessory dwelling unit will be doing a zoning development permit through the planning office, and that may be associated with a building permit as well for the stove to be added for that electrical or gas extension.
So we're asking for a amendment to the zoning requirements, basically, when we do this.
Correct. This is an amendment to Title 18, which is your
Like a
zoning.
conditional use permit or something.
No. And so there's a 4-step process, 6-step process there that ends, if required, a certificate of occupancy for the structural alterations that take place. Then there's a requirement, which is another check in the system for an annual permit renewal, because one of the requirements for the owner is to sign an affidavit that they are utilizing the accessory dwelling unit and that they are going to utilize it within the compliance of the standards and the regulations. So each year we will send out a notice and ask that that affidavit be signed by February 1st of each year. And that way we can keep, especially if there is a transfer of ownership, the new owner may not be interested in having the accessory dwelling unit, and so we will take them off the map, take them off the list, have them remove the stove, and then that will go away.
Is there a fee associated with the annual renewal?
We were not going to charge a fee. It's pretty simple paperwork and not very time consuming.
All right.
The standards, there are 9 of them. The first one deals with design and appearance in order to maintain a complementary design in the neighborhood. The owner occupancy requirement, so the owner of the home has to either live in the ADU or the primary part of the home. We have limited the size so that it is truly secondary to the primary use, and it cannot be more than 40% of the single-family home total square area, nor more than 800 square feet or less than 300. The parking requirements are contingent upon how many vehicles the occupant of the ADU has. So if it's a single person with 1 car, then they have to have at least an additional parking spot off-street and on an approved area. If it's a couple that has 2 vehicles, then they will need to have at least 2 parking spaces in addition to the 2 parking spaces that are required for that primary home. The density controls is relatively unique to this. We borrowed this language and technique from Boulder, and it has worked for them since 1982. They have had accessory dwelling units, and it has spread these units out in the community. So in a suburban residential zone, they need to be spaced with a radius of 600 feet to football fields, or in the urban residential zone, a spacing of 300 feet. And in the commercial zones, we also apply the 300-foot spacing. And last meeting, we showed you an example of Gary's home and in the Sunny Glen subdivision and what a 600-foot radius would look like. So it's 1 home within about 4 homes on either side. The maximum number of units is only 1, so you can't do 2 or 3 ADUs per lot. And if you have a home particularly in the older parts of town where the lots are very small and homes were built across a lot line. If it is across a lot line, straddles that lot line, then we're asking that they combine their lots. That's a very simple process, but it does then create a single lot. Home occupations will be allowed, but they're subject to our current standards. And then we encourage barrier-free ADUs. Lastly, the existing ADUs that maybe were constructed prior to zoning being in place or somehow were come in under the radar, didn't get a building permit, they are considered legal non-conforming ADUs. We will map and try to identify as many of those as possible. I'm thinking particularly one that is very familiar to most of us is with the Maytag house. There is a cottage behind that home. So we will approach the owner. Now they can't conform to our current code because it is a separate cottage, but we will map it and they will have that legal non-conforming status, which is exactly how you treat other zoning changes with your codes when you have pre-existing conditions, whether it's a sign or other uses.
Sally, in that case, then, the density requirements would apply, and that would impact any of the lots surrounding that may or may not want an ADU.
That's correct, yes.
And
Sally?
does that be,
Okay.
does that become a title issue as it relates to if they go to sell the home? I mean, I guess as I think about it, if we now have, if this were to pass and we have a legal way to address ADUs and somebody, they sell the home and it's non-conforming, does that non-conforming status just continue on?
Yes, it does. And it's not any different than homes that were built without proper setbacks or heights. So they are pre-existing, non-conforming.
All right.
But, yeah, I've been through the older part of downtown, and they have some very large lots, and things are kind of scattered around. In the case of Maytag, theoretically, they could, in fact, have it separated into two lots, which will allow a house on each one, the cottage and their main house, for instance. Would that be a possible solution if they wanted, somebody in the neighborhood wanted to have an ADU when theirs is already there?
It's possible that that could happen, but it would be more likely that they would separate it and sell it so that it would be two private ownerships. So then the ADU would go away and it would be considered a single-family home.
Sally, were you done with your presentation?
Just a little bit more about some of the citizen input that I've received, and you received a letter from Mr. Ken Hartsfield. He's here in the audience this evening, but I wanted to address some of the comments that he had made in relationship to the building code, the International Residential Code. I've been speaking with the regional building department inspectors about this. These are not considered duplexes, so the requirement for a firewall is not applicable here, or the separation of heating systems. A duplex has two separate ownerships. This is still all under one ownership. There may be some upgrades that are required, like carbon monoxide detectors or other things. If they come in with a remodel, they'll have to bring it up to code. So that's how that is addressed. And Mr. Hartsfield also talked about the provision to encourage barrier-free ADUs. The reason we didn't expand on that was that we wanted to keep it simple. It's purely an encouragement, not a requirement or a standard, so we didn't want to make it more complicated than it needed to be. And then lastly, about the legal non-conforming ADUs. He recommended that they be inspected or brought up to code. That will happen only if they decide to modify them. So we don't go around, many of us who live in older homes may have insufficient code compliance, but your home is still safe. If it is unsafe, then you'll bring it up to code by putting in a new furnace or hot water heater or whatever you're needing to upgrade it. So we don't see a need to regulate those other than to map them, identify them, and try to bring them into compliance if feasible. So with that, we would recommend approval of Ordinance 1209. And Mayor Pro Tem, when you open the public comment, I did receive an email this afternoon that I would like to read into the record.
All right. Questions of staff? Ken?
Regarding the existing units, is there any way to, you talk about mapping them and getting them, you know, what method, if any, is to encourage people to come forward and get on that list? And I guess part of my question is, if they decide they want to sell that home or maybe rent that piece that they've got that's non-conforming, if they advertise that, is that illegal? It's non-conforming. Is that how you're going to find out about them? I don't understand how we're going to get them on the list unless you provide something to get them to want to come forward.
Well, we're aware of some, just like the Maytag House, because they're obvious. I am also aware of some when they do go on the real estate market and the appraiser or the bank has called us to ask about whether that is legal or not. So we will go back to the owners of those that we've become aware of. There may be a dozen or or so. We're also, I spoke with the tax assessor this afternoon, not the assessor, but one of the staff, and they have a short list that we will also compare notes on. And then there has been quite a bit of publication in the newspaper to let folks know that we're moving forward with this. So hopefully people will be aware and will come forward and try to get on the list and apply and become legal with their ADUs.
Would that then, if they come forward, would that require an inspection of the property for that?
It will require for them to submit their zoning development permit, and so we'll have a floor plan, we'll be able to evaluate it, and potentially, yes, we will do an inspection.
So if as is probably the case in some of these, they may be owner developed, enhancements which may or may not be to code. Now would be the time to bring them up to code.
Yes.
And that would probably help them someday in resale.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's very important at resale that you do have all the proper permits in place.
And I would just like to add one other thing. I was a little skeptical of all this before, but looking at the 9 provisions and what Planning Commission has done and staff, I compliment you all on that. Very well thought out, and I think you've covered the bases.
Thank you.
Carol?
I had a couple of questions, but I want to start with one that is a follow-up to Ken's question. For those instances where we have illegal ADUs, and I'm sure they exist, as those are brought to your attention either through a bank calling to say is this legal or not, what is the penalty for having that type of ADU? It's not legal non-conforming, it's just flat out illegal.
If they're in violation, typically what we do is try to work with a property owner to get them into compliance, ask them to remove the stove. In fact, we just had an owner do that a year ago on County Road, and he was very compliant, took care of it right away. As far as if they don't voluntarily comply, then there is a process to send them a summons, and they come to court, and they'll be before the municipal judge.
I think it would be more likely that we would run into a case where there were not enough parking spaces or was not owner occupied.
Well-
Same process, correct?
Mhm.
One other follow-on question, I guess, to follow on what you're saying a little bit. I think one of the potentially biggest problems, especially where people have developed lower levels and basements, would be not having proper egress from those levels. I mean, there's height restrictions, size. They may not even have a window in that particular area, and that's going to be something to be very difficult for them to correct. But I guess we'll just have to deal with that as it comes up.
Right, and that will be part of the review of the building permit, is to ensure that they meet the building code.
Okay.
John?
Well, the intent of the ordinance obviously is to have ADUs developed here in Woodland Park. How do we encourage that with the use of fees? And what would they be in this case?
Well, I mentioned that the renewal, we won't be charging for the renewal of the affidavit. The zoning development permit, the fee is $38. So it's a pretty minimal fee, and we would encourage folks to apply, do the paperwork, and then pay the appropriate building department plan review and plan permit. And going with regional building department, our residential fees are quite affordable.
Okay, thank you.
So along those lines, I remember having a discussion at one time about tap fees. So if I own a home where I've got a detached garage, I decide that I want to, or I own a home with no garage and I want to build a detached garage, and I decide on the second floor of that detached garage I want to put an apartment. That would be legal under the ADU scenario, correct?
Correct.
Are there any additional tap fees associated with that?
No.
Okay.
Why?
Yeah, that's too easy.
One lot, one tap, one owner, one tap, for example.
Right.
They would use more water with that additional, so their water usage would go up in the block structure. They'd pay for water at a higher rate as water goes up. But we don't, for example, you wouldn't just have a tap for a garage or an ADU, and we wouldn't sub-meter it either. So it's 1 meter per lot per owner.
Following on and down in the weeds, we have a lot of donut holes, and it sounds like Teller County has allowed ADUs for some time. And what if a lot is in Teller County but not in Woodland Park? How does that affect the density? Would we take into account Teller County ADUs?
Teller County's ADUs are only allowed in agriculturally zoned properties.
Okay.
So I don't think we have too many of those in the donut hole.
But I think to answer the question, we wouldn't take that into account as it relates
No.
to density.
No.
So we could have a
You're
county
right.
lot right next, and have another Woodland Park lot right next door, both with ADUs.
Yeah.
I'm still unclear on the parking requirements. Right now, a lot is required 2 off-street parking places. If an ADU owner is allowed to have up to 4 unrelated adults in their ADU, that means you have to have 4 additional parking places. And how would you enforce that?
That would be the worst case scenario, is to have 4 off-street parking spaces. And so when they apply for their zoning development permit, and they do have 4 adults each with a vehicle, then they have to show on their site plan that they do have those off-street parking spaces. And if they can't meet it, then we can't approve the ADU.
Would we revoke an ADU permit if over time it was obvious they did have more, or a need for more parking spaces?
I think that could be potential, but that's the beauty of having the affidavit every year, is that we can check to ensure that their renters or their habitants, or the folks using the ADU have adequate parking.
So the annual renewal is just that, it's a renewal?
It is,
Okay.
yes.
So this, whether we pass this tonight or not, currently today, and even after this was passed, covenants aside, my home, if I want to rent out a room in my basement, I could do that.
You sure could.
And I wouldn't have to meet any of the requirements related to the ADU because I don't have a stove.
Correct.
So as long as I don't have a second kitchen, I could rent out the room to 2 or 3 people. I wouldn't have to worry about any of the additional parking requirements, do the affidavit. I wouldn't have to do any of that.
Correct.
So as this really boils down to it, it's really, we're going to allow people to have a second kitchen, if you will, that maybe is in a different contained area. I think when you look at the garage example, that to me is much clearer on an ADU because it's a separate area. And that will be the case regardless of what we do this evening.
Yes, the zoning regulations allow up to 5 unrelated people to live within a home that has 1 kitchen.
John?
The off-street parking spaces have to have driveways for each of those vehicles that meet city standards, correct?
Right, they can't park on the grass or in the landscaped areas. They have to have an improved driveway. And in residential, that requires a gravel road-based type driveway. It does not need to be paved. Most driveways that are paved in town it's driven by the covenants.
And once again, aside from covenants, because I know that covenants address these types of items differently, but as far as parking on the street in neighborhoods, you're allowed to park overnight on a city
You are.
street.
Yes.
I believe that the law is it can't sit there for longer than a certain period of time before it's moved.
72 hours.
Right. So assuming that somebody lived there, I mean, we talk about off-street parking, but, you know, they could park on the street on a residential street, that's legal. And if they get in their car and go to work every day, they are meeting the law.
But that's with a single-family home without an ADU.
Right. So
Yes.
in an ADU case, we're gonna require off-street parking.
Yes.
All right.
It doesn't mean the vehicles have to park off-street, there just has to be the spaces there.
Gotcha.
And one last comment, in our research, they have shown that there's other planning departments see about 1 ADU per 1,000 single-family residents. We have about 3,200 rooftops, single families, so we expect maybe 3 a year.
Carol?
That's an important point. And another point you had brought up recently was on the square footage limitations. Could you explain again how an exception to the 800 square feet and no less than 300 square feet, how a variance could be granted?
Yeah, those are done administratively, so that requirement is very specific, either 40% and not less than 300 or more than 800. But if you have a ranch-style home that may have 1,000-foot footprint with a basement, and they want to convert the basement, then it may be more than the 800 square feet or more than the 40%. So we would look at it from a design standpoint and give some flexibility to that existing home.
But it would be at the discretion of the planning department?
Yes.
And along those lines, on the density question, just, you know, for whatever reason, there's an ADU, it's within 300 feet or whatever, and, you know, something changes in your life and you gotta have your in-laws move in with you or whatever, and, you know, you're just unlucky because you didn't get there first. Is there an opportunity for
There is.
leniency or a variance there as well?
Yes, so we have a 20% slide that we could make in that spacing.
And is it measured from the ADU itself, or is it measured from the lot line?
It's measured from the front door of the house.
All right. Okay. If we don't have any other burning questions, I'd like to go ahead and open the public hearing.
I do see, Mayor and Council and Sally, I do see that, based on the questions, I see 2 minor suggestions I'd like to make to the ordinance, and I can offer those now, or I can wait till after your public comments.
Why don't you offer them now, and then that way, if anybody from the public wants to comment on your comments.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The 2 minor changes would be, the first occurs on page 3, under what is marked as Section C, Annual Permit Renewal Required. What we want to do there is we want to change subsection 3 so that it contains 4 reasons that the planning director may revoke the permit. So it would read C3, the planning director may revoke the permit if, and then there should be a colon, and then there would be sub A, the property owner does not comply with other ordinances of the city which regulate property maintenance and nuisances, semicolon, or, and then the next 3 would be changed to B, C, and D.
All right.
And then one other minor change would be on page 4. Under that second to the last paragraph, subsection E, where we explain that legal non-conforming ADUs are units that were in existence prior to the adoption of this ordinance that do not comply with this ordinance.
Okay.
Because we wouldn't want to have someone labeled forever as non-conforming. So if they're older than this ordinance, they existed prior to the ordinance, but they come into compliance, they are no longer legal non-conforming. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
We may have more questions after public comments. All right, with that, I'd like to open the public hearing for item 9A. We have 3 folks signed up, and so we'll start there, and if there are additional folks that want to discuss this item, we'll have you up after that. So the first on the list is Jeff Watson. John did not sign before you. No, you left a space for him. Mr. Watson,
Name and
please.
address, right?
Yeah, name and address.
Jeff Watson, 405 Sunny Glen Court, member of the Woodland Park Planning Commission. I guess I wanted to just make a couple of points. We obviously encourage you to vote yes on the ordinance, but Sally did a good job in terms of the logic that we used to craft the ordinance. We were very careful and I think very conservative in terms of our approach to additional dwelling units or accessory. What was not mentioned was the comprehensive plan, and since we're custodians of the plan and the Planning Commission, I think it bears mention that this is indeed furthers, although very, very small, maybe embarrassingly small, steps toward our plans, goals of affordable housing and flexibility in housing for our population. I think it's a necessary first step, and I think in terms of the plan, it is very, very conforming to the plan, without doing a lot of damage that a lot of people have been, at least voiced to the Planning Commission. I think we've taken most of that into account as we crafted the ordinance. Second point I'd like to make is in terms of a resident and in terms of the Planning Commission as we approached it, was the idea of protecting existing homeowners. I live in a neighborhood that a couple of you folks do, that had, I think at one time, a homeowners association, has covenants. When I built a deck, I needed variance, and I looked at the covenants, and I searched all over town to find someone to sign off on a variance. Finally ended up with the lone remaining homeowner association member, Alan Brown, and twisted his arm to sign the variance. But my point is that as I walk around my neighborhood, I see people building additional garages and perhaps converting inside with their prior garages. I see a lot of that kind of activity. I don't know. I think I would suspect that we might even have an accessory dwelling unit going in our neighborhood at the current time. So I want some protection that this sort of thing. I'm not opposed to them, but I don't want it to get out of hand. And I think for that reason, was in terms of my participation in the Planning Commission, I think this does protect at least my neighborhood and a lot of others that don't have covenants. So I think we've done a good job. And one final point. It's always good to benchmark against other places, and what helped convince me, was just looking in the map of Boulder, who's had this since 1982, and looking at over those years, the way their accessory dwelling units have been distributed around the city. Very non-threatening, very well managed, and just looks really good. So, I know John's going to talk, so I don't want to, take too much time, but in terms of the Planning Commission, I think we did a good job. Thank you for your comments, and I think by and large this is a good thing for Woodland Park. That's it. Questions?
No. Any questions?
No. Thank you, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Next on the list, John DeVoe. Mr. DeVoe. And if you don't remember, I'm sure you do, name and address.
My name? John DeVoe, 940 East Kelly's Road. I had mixed emotions about this when it came to us. And we spent a lot of time going through this. I think when you look at the human aspect of this, I have a hard time understanding living in a community that would say Grandma can't live downstairs because she wants to bake an apple pie. It just doesn't make sense. Remember, this is not a ordinance that goes to the property. It goes to the individual. So if the house is sold, that goes away, and the new people have to reapply. I think what's going to happen is they're going to do it anyway. If something happens in your family, that one of your children comes home with a couple kids with them, or if Grandma comes home because Grandma can't take care of herself anymore, you're going to accommodate it. And if the law says she can't be there, you're going to figure out a way around it. I would rather see a stove put in, vented properly, done within a unit like that, than a hot plate on an extension cord stuck into 5 outlets. And I think that's one of the things you have to look at when you look at this. It's going to be there, and just as you pointed out, Mayor Pro Tem, it's going to happen anyway. So I think rather we can be proactive. We can look at this. The parking issue we thought was important because there's a lot of our streets that are narrow. They don't have provisions for parking on the sides, so people park half on, half off. When we went through the number of foreclosures we had in this community, a lot of those places were rented out by institutions. There were cars parked on lawns, that kind of stuff. We tried to put something in there that would stop that from happening. And I just feel it'll be a safer, better community without a ton of regulations if we go ahead and do this and we know it's part of our community. Thanks. Any questions? Thanks.
Questions?
Thank you, John.
Yep. Thank you, John. All right, Ken Hartsfield. How are you this evening?
Very well, thank you. Evening, Ken Hartsfield, 1151 Sundance Circle. Appreciate you taking the time to look at the letter I issued to council and Sally's response to those. So part of the reason to be here is to answer any questions, but maybe Sally's addressed those pretty well. As an architect, I am a little confused on the two ordinances, or the ordinance that's proposed and the building code. And now Sally's explanation is that it's not counted as two separate units, as one dwelling unit, but I can't find that distinction in the building code. And when I interpret the building code, I have two separate units and I have to provide fire separation. So with the intent that Sally's expressed that it's not two separate units, I'd look for some clarification that it's not and that we don't have to comply, so that when I go take the plans to the building department, I don't have to argue about it and just document it someplace. So I guess that's my only comment at this point. I appreciate the efforts and I do support the ordinance. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to address that.
Ken, I think that's a good question, and we'll let Sally address that when we move out of the public comment period. So, any questions for Ken? Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right, those are the three folks that have signed up for this item. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward and speak on this tonight? No?
Sally had a.
Sally, yes. Thank you, Carol. You had something that you wanted to read into the record?
I do, yes.
Thank you, Carol.
This afternoon, or this morning, both Lisa and I had spoken with Sandy Gordon. Sandy owns property at 820 Sun Valley Drive. She winters in Florida, so she wasn't able to be here this evening, but we did send her the ordinance, and she writes that thank you for forwarding this AUD document to me. As an owner of residential property in Woodland Park, and having read the ordinance proposed, I would like to officially oppose this ordinance. Although the concept is addressing a housing need, I feel this could be better accomplished without amending the single-family zoning. I thank you and all the city officials for all that you do for our city, and rarely do I disagree, but this is, in my opinion, should not be adopted. Thank you for your time and consideration, Sandy Gordon.
Thank you, Sally.
Uh-huh.
And with that, we'll close the public comment period on this item. And there are other questions of staff. Sally, I'd like you to try to maybe address
Yes.
Ken's question as it relates to separation.
Yes. In the building code, you have a variety of different occupancies depending upon your use. This is a single-family home, and even a 2-unit home is considered a R3 occupancy. If you have more than 2 units, then it does not fall within the R3 occupancy. So in talking with the building inspectors, they do not see that this will kick in the firewall requirements unless, for example, you're building a new garage and you're having to put the new unit above, then most definitely you will need to have that firewall in between the garage space, because that is an area that is more risky. But these units that would be contained within the house, it's still part of the house. So it's not like you are creating an entirely separate unit that may be owned and occupied by people that are not under your control. So they don't see an issue with that. We'll get further clarification from the engineers at Regional Building Department, but thus far the inspectors are not concerned about it.
Okay. Other questions of staff? Bob, would you?
Well, I was wondering if just the record of the meeting would show that answer, would that satisfy that council has agreed to that understanding when applying the International Building Code, whether that would be sufficient to resolve the issue?
No.
Well, and I don't think that's something
No.
that we can really.
We will get further clarification from the engineers at Regional Building Department and Henry, the official, building
Yeah.
official.
We adopt code, but we don't get in the middle of trying to change that code. Carol?
For new construction, would that still apply if it was purpose-built to have two living spaces?
That's a very good point. For new construction, they may require that those firewalls or separations are done. And I understand Ken's concern because he, as an architect, wants to draw or propose to his client exactly what will be sufficient for the plan review.
What would be interesting to me is if it had a separate entrance, it was totally enclosed, there was no other access through the house to this unit, and it had its own separate, I mean, to me, that's starting to get into
A duplex?
where you're separating it versus, you know, you got a room downstairs and you got a area where you're gonna put in a stove, and they got a bedroom, and they can come out to the common area where the stove is.
So your understanding then would be that we're talking about a situation where there's only one entrance, and if it were to require, or if it had a separate entrance, whether it's an existing property or a new property.
I don't know. I think for the purpose of what we're doing this evening, I don't know if we need to get into the nuance of whether firewalls are required or not. I mean, I think we're opening the opportunity, and then we'll let staff address this with the building department, and, you know, the requirements will be what they are. I think Ken's comments are, he wants a little clarification to know what those requirements are.
Yeah, I would just comment that there are very few perfect ordinances written and passed.
I thought the ones that we did were perfect.
No, they aren't.
Well, I have to appreciate Ken's concern. A builder or an architect wants certainty, and if it's a new construction project, you would want to know if there is a requirement for firewalls or separate entrance or soundproofing. And I think we need to address that. I don't know if it has to be addressed in this ordinance or if it's in the building code.
I think it's a building code issue. I mean, Sally, you can jump in here. To me, this is a building code issue. Our ordinance really is zoning related to allow for the use, and the mechanics of what's allowed and or how it's done fall really under the building code.
Yeah, that's right.
And I imagine if we would like for Sally to come back and talk to us at some point when she and Kent have ironed out the situation that he has described, and in fact, we may want to make at that point some other changes to this ordinance. You know,
Well, and
as
once
we get
again,
smarter.
I don't know if we can make changes to our ordinance that address building code items.
Yeah, no,
We just want to be informed, I think.
yep.
Okay. Right.
Well, one more follow-on then to Mr. Hartsfield's concerns. I think we could strike provision number 9, which simply encourages barrier-free ADUs. It doesn't have any teeth. I don't see a reason to have it in the ordinance, unless there's something that we can make it stick, or a reason to make it stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had that conversation at one point about the value of having that, but it was simply to encourage that as a consideration as ADUs are built, yeah.
Well, I think that's a discussion we can have as we,
Resolution.
as we move forward here.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions of staff, or?
I would only ask Kip to make any comments he may have in terms of water usage. You've already alluded to the fact that one lot, one tap, no concerns with the minimal number of ADU applications I expect we'll have on our water supply.
No concerns. It's a pretty small number. Water will be charged at a higher rate with more usage.
So, John, before we get to you, I think you're wanting to make a motion here. I think Carol's question or comment, I don't know how the rest of the council feels. I'm kind of indifferent. I mean, if it's in there, I think encouragement's fine. I could argue that either way. I don't know how everybody else feels. I mean, we could just leave it up to the motion maker and see how that goes. I just would hate to see somebody not support it because they wanted to see that one provision knocked out.
I'm okay with leaving it.
All right. Are we ready for the question?
Go
All
ahead,
right.
John.
I move that the city council approve ordinance 1209, amending chapters 18.06, 18.09, and 18.33 of the Woodland Park Municipal Code to provide for accessory dwelling units in certain zone districts within the city, providing the ADUs meet certain standards.
With the
With the
adjustment.
amendments that,
Oh, no,
that Aaron.
with
Oh,
Aaron.
yes. With the amendments that our city attorney made.
All right. We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 1209 with the amendments presented by Ms. Smith. Cindy?
Thank you. Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes?
Smith?
Yes.
Bravetto?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
And as we close on this item, I'd like to acknowledge and thank you to the Planning Commission, who I know spent a great deal of time. Staff, I'm sure, spent a great deal of time. These are not easy items to wrap your arms around. John Schaefer as well. I know this is something that you have championed before council and now on council. And I can remember going to a meeting that we discussed what steps we could take to kind of chip away at some of the housing needs that we have. And while this may not be the major huge step, every step is an important one. So John, I don't know if you have any comments you'd like to make.
No, I thank those that have been involved along the path. And the meeting that Eric referred to, the first one occurred February of last year. So some of us have been working on this over a year now. And I appreciate the council's support. I think this is a good step for Woodland Park.
All right. Moving on, item 9B. Item 9B is a quasi-judicial matter, so I just want to read this before we move into that, and that is council members use electronic devices to access the materials relevant to the public hearing before us. Be assured that it is the common practice of this city council that these devices are not being used for texting, emailing, or other communications during public hearings, and that's relevant to quasi-judicial proceedings, not necessarily legislative proceedings, so that's why I didn't read it for 9A. So 9B is to consider ordinance number 1210, accepting a permanent public utility easement located at Lot 1, Dayspring Christian Fellowship Subdivision. And with that, we'll turn to our Utilities Director, Kip Wiley.
Thank you. I'd like to present item 9C as well, because they kind of go hand in hand, if that's all right.
Yeah,
And I would just ask just for a separate motion for each.
That makes total sense. And item 9C is reviewing ordinance number 1211 for the same purpose, a public utility easement. So,
Thank you. Ordinances 1210 and 1211 establish a public utility easement across a portion of the Impact Christian Church property on Highway 67, and just to the south of that property, Lot 2, a public easement, utility easement there as well. These easements have, or if granted, the easement would consist of both a water and sewer main, 8 inches in size, that serve the Impact Christian Church with water and sewer. If you have any questions, I would just recommend to approve both ordinances.
and so these improvements were built some time ago, that just the easements were never granted.
Yes, sir.
And so now, through granting these easements, it offers full acceptance from the city's perspective as far as maintenance and that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
Any questions of staff before we open the public comment? All right, I'd like to open the public hearing on ordinances 1210 and 1211. Anyone wanting to speak on these items? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period for 9A and 9B and 9C. Any additional comments? So we'll need two motions.
We will move to approve ordinance number 1210.
Second.
So we have a motion, and I believe Gary seconded, for approval of ordinance number 1210. Cindy?
Thank you. Schaefer?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Bravado?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Matthews?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Move to approve ordinance number 1211.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 1211. Cindy?
Smith?
Yes.
Bravado?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Moving on to item 10, new business. We have two items this evening. The first item is the reconciliation of the 2013 Water Tap Management Plan, and we get to go to the spreadsheet, the famous spreadsheet. So, Utilities Director Kip Wiley will walk us through this.
The good stuff. On your desk, I've handed out the paper version of the spreadsheet of the 2013 Water Tap Management Plan reconciliation. So, as you are aware, our municipal code requires us to do an annual review of tap fees, and this was established in Ordinance 703 in 1997. The Utilities Department has done a review and analysis of the reconciliation, and also has been presented to the Utilities Advisory Committee and recommended forward to City Council. This reconciliation is proven to be a great tool in planning and is very valuable. As I walk through it, reads like a book from left to right. It basically covers all expenses, both capital expenses, operational expenses, and then revenues as well, both capital and operational. I'd like to point your attention to column B, and you can see at the top we have the columns labeled A through Q in parentheses. Column B reflects the taps available for the year. And another thing I'd like to mention is the dotted line that goes through the center of it. Everything above the dotted line is actual numbers. Everything below is future projections. And back to column B, under the bottom line, or under the dotted line in 2014, you can see we have 829 taps available. As you go down, you'll see at certain times of the year when taps go up, that says we develop more water. So that's the purpose for that. Continuing on to column C1 and C2, this tracks taps sold. In 2013, in column C1, we had sold 6 single-family, and then you'll see a large number at 104. I wanted to point that out because that includes the Trail Ridge Apartments, 96 units, which has been quite substantial. As we go through, I'll point out the impacts from that. Moving over to column F, right above the dotted line in 2013, you'll see a value of $610,125. That's plant investment fees from tap sales. And we haven't had a revenue like that in quite some time. So it's helped us quite some bit. Moving down to column H, in 2013, that's total commodity revenue from all metered water sales and miscellaneous revenue. So continuing on all the way over to the right-hand side, column P, the annual balance. This year we finished very well with a $572,000 on the plus side. It's one of our largest in quite some time, and that's due to the tap sales of Trail Ridge. And then as you move over one more column to the right, and cumulative balance, we're pretty healthy. With that said, if you go down just one line below the dotted line in column P, you will see a value of $10,004. That's what we're projecting for this year, where we'll be at. This does not include any big one-time tap sales. So with that said, we will probably end higher with what's foreseen in the near future. Things to note in column E. This is the average tap fee column and how we project tap sales and what the equivalents would be. We have proposed, what's in here is proposed as a 5% increase in tap fees starting in 2014, and that continues all the way to 2030. Kind of major changes from this year, from last year, is in single-family tap sales, column C1, we have put in what we feel is a more conservative number of actual tap sales. It's been typically larger tap sales, and we feel that with the tap sales that's happened in the last 8 to 10 years, that this is a more accurate representation of what we could see going forward. And that pretty much controls everything as you move over to the right in column Q in the cumulative balance. Also in here, we have tried to put in a rate decrease for existing customers, and in 2017 we have a 6.85% rate decrease in water rates.
Would you say that again, please?
Yeah. In 2017, we have a 6.85% water rate decrease for metered for water sales. So for existing customers, they would. In 2010, we had a substantial increase of 13.7%, and we had to do that because of the low tap sales to cover us. And you can see, because of that, we've been holding steady. We'd like to honor our existing customers with a rate decrease because they've carried the load.
Good. I don't have a problem with that.
I'd like to make a comment on that if I could. It's going to start with a question. I'm sorry to jump in here, but I think it's the appropriate time. One of the things that I think is very critical going forward, and I've said this, and I'll continue to say it whether I'm here or somewhere else, and that is, a terminal reservoir, storage reservoir, I believe is extremely important to our long-term sustainability and stability as a community. Is that figured in here from
Yes,
a
it is.
capital cost perspective?
Yep, I'll get to that in a moment here.
All right, because the reason I bring that up is I get a little fearful, as much as I would love to see decreases, and I think it's great that we project them. Those are the types of things that come back to haunt you at a later date, because I have concerns about saying, we're gonna. I think, to me, a better policy item is to say, we're not going to keep hordes of cash sitting in an account that are just going to sit there, and that, when we reach an opportunity that we can reduce fees, that's when I think you talk about reducing fees. But there are a lot of things, a lot of moving parts out there related to regulations that could impact how we treat water, the costs of that treatment. That could all figure in that in 2017, because I know the way this works is people write down, hey, 2017, my water rates are going to go down.
This is a projection. Everything below the line is a projection, and we have to adjust as everything happens, like you say. You make very good points. In 2015...
Before you continue on, though, let me address that reduction. In 2010, as Kip mentioned, because our tap sales were so minimal, you may recall Jim Schultz brought to us almost an emergency process. To meet our obligations, we had to increase the rates. And at that time, he recommended, and the council supported, to be very intentional about trying to reduce that rate at some point in the future. In his projection, he thought we could do it in 2017, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And that's what Kip is trying to do. This was like the Pillsbury Doughboy. We punched in the stomach and an eyeball popped out. So every time we adjusted one of these parameters, something changed. What we were able to do was to cut that in half and at least honor half of that moral commitment, if you will. Your points are well taken, and of course each year we would look at this, but as Kip finishes this up, know that we got to a place where we could take into account all these different parameters and at least partially honor that commitment.
We hope so.
Exactly. Exactly.
With that said, in 2015, will pay off a very large balance, $550,000 a year in debt service. And then in 2016, we can then pay wastewater, the money they had loaned, the water fund. And then 2018 would be the actual initial start of payments for an augmentation reservoir, although the cash-funded portion of that would have started in 2017. So that is in the plan. Also in the plan was a $2.5 million upgrade in our metering system to a new, more advanced metering, so we don't have to go door to door and read meters. More automated system, allowing those guys to focus on other maintenance that they would be able to do. And that's pretty much sums it up. Unless you have any questions, I'm recommending a 5% increase in water and sewer plant investment fees for 2014, effective April 1st, 2014.
And when was the last increase that we had? I can't remember. It's been a while.
2009.
Okay. John?
You have, as I recall, you told me 2 locations that you're looking at now for reservoir storage. When do you have to make a decision, whether it's Loy Gulch or a site south of the city?
Well, in the near future, I couldn't give you an exact time. It's going to happen pretty quick. A couple things have to come into play with each site, particularly the second site, the larger site, which would be more ideal, but there's a little bit more involved with that site. The site up in Loy Gulch, that would basically be just sitting down with the Boy Scout camp and having a conversation with them and moving forward.
Okay. I got another question then. 2013 row, and in the C2 column, new multifamily and commercial taps, and you talked about the 104 number.
Yes, sir.
You said that was for 96 units?
Yes, sir.
For Trail Ridge, so that's like 4 of the 7 buildings. Where are the rest of those, the other 72?
What?
Where do they appear in that C2 column?
Yeah, I'll make a statement. And I know Kip's being ultra conservative here. I can tell you with certainty that the 72 are going to happen in the next week.
Next week?
All right.
Our philosophy is, as Mayor Pro Tem has said, is to be extremely conservative. The term that Kip uses is don't count your chickens before they hatch. We don't have a check for those 72. We're not going to prognosticate that. Okay. When we get those 72, we'll readjust this, and it will just make things a little bit better.
Okay.
But like Eric also said, the importance of the augmentation reservoir and other factors come into play with all of this. So we've always kind of taken that approach, don't count your chickens. Especially when you're talking one-time large projects.
I'll just say that payment is imminent.
Yeah. Okay. And another piece of good news then would be that you paid off the bond for the phase 1 of the water treatment facility last year.
Well, the wastewater bond that was paid off.
Yeah.
That was for existing debt, not exactly phase 1. Phase 1 we're still paying on, but it was for previous debt.
Okay.
So I'll ask a question as it relates to debt, something that I know that various ones of us have brought it up at one time or another. Does it make sense if we have capital to advance some of the payment of some of these? And I realize that 2015, I think there's a big payoff coming. We also have some water that we bought that I think goes through 2017 or 18. Does it make sense, rather than have the cash sit in the bank, we can earn an automatic 4%, whatever we're paying on that money, by just paying it off early?
We can look into that. There's also other ways. Maybe we can take some of that cash and pay cash towards the augmentation reservoir, get that process rolling at the same time, instead of maybe paying that off right away, because it is so close to being paid off, or paying mostly principal.
I think, I would like you to kind of consider that.
I
think there's
definitely
advantages to moving the reservoir forward, but there's also advantages, if we're not going to do that, to paying off the debt and saving the small amount of interest, although there could be additional fees related paying the bonds off early that, may negate some of that. It just doesn't make sense, but those are the things you.
We'll definitely look at it.
Any additional questions or comments? I guess the last thing I would point out is, I didn't do the math, what's 72 divided by 5, whatever that number is. Yeah, 16 or, yeah. So, at a 5% increase yearly, in 15 years, the tap fees would double. And so I just want to throw that out there. I think 5% probably makes sense this year, but in future years, that's something that future councils can wrestle with. But just consider that, a 5% increase, time value money, that before you know it, you'll look up and we'll have $25,000 in tap fees. And, at some point, I think that could become maybe unsustainable.
Yeah. Especially.
Yeah. All right, are there any other comments? I don't know. Can we ask the audience?
Well, I'd like to thank Kip.
Yeah, I guess we will.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and make the motion that we approve Resolution 774, establishing the water and sewer plant investment, I wrote over it, fees, with an increase effective April 1st, 2014.
Second.
I'll let you decide. We have a motion and a second.
Thank you. Brevetto?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey? Yes. Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Kip.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 10B. It is to consider resolution number 775, an IGA with Teller County authorizing submission of a community development block grant application to the Colorado Department of Local Affairs for a waterline loop in and around the Pikes Peak Regional Hospital campus. And for that, we're going to turn to our Director of Economic Development and DDA, Brian Fleer.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. In your packet, you have both the IGA and the resolution. The IGA authorizes the city to act as the lead in facilitating the application and submittal of the CDBG grant to the Department of Local Affairs. The resolution authorizes the city manager to authorize me in the Office of Economic Development and Economic and Downtown Development to go ahead and pursue. So there's a step process. It's a requirement of DOLA to go through this process. A little history of why we're here. As you'll recall, the city requirement and also a Northeast Teller Fire Protection District requirement will not allow any further development at the hospital campus because they do not have a redundant fire or water supply to the hospital. So this loop allows that, facilitates future construction of both the hospital and the campus, which is approximately 20 acres. What we have before us currently is an 85-bed nursing facility. This particular CDB grant is driven by jobs. For every job, there's $20,000 that's offered. We're also working with the Southern Colorado Economic Development District that will help us write the grant and submit it to the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. So it's a good cooperative effort between the city, county, SCED, Office of Economic Development and International Trade to get this project underway. About $350,000 to $400,000 grant, water loop, and allowing for the future expansion of the hospital. What questions can I answer?
Questions of Brian? So this would be a secondary feed to the hospital? Or a loop around the campus?
Loop.
All right. And as far as the 85-bed facility goes, and I know that's down the line, but tap fees would be paid by that facility, and those would be a double tap fees, I guess, because
That's correct.
They're outside the city of Woodland Park.
That's correct. As you recall, there's two resolutions. One actually applies to the hospital, which was in that agreement allowed in-city rates for both taps and monthly user fees. Anything outside the hospital footprint is the double rates, both tap fees and user fees.
And if the hospital expands, would that fall under the first resolution?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'd be looking for a motion.
I'd move approval of Resolution 775, authorizing submission of community development block grant application to the Colorado Department of Local Affairs.
Second.
Do we need,
In the IGA with Teller County.
perfect.
Oh,
Agreed.
agreed. Cindy?
Thank you. Carlson?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yep.
Matthews?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Rivetto?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Brian.
Pro Tem Council.
Appreciate that. All right, moving on to item number 11, public comments not on the agenda. Is there anyone that would like to comment on an item that we've not covered this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports. Item 12A is the mayor's report. Two items here I'd like to read for upcoming events. Monday, March 24th, meet and greet with Sheriff Mike Enzinger. I knew I was going to mess that up. Council chambers, 5 to 6:30 p.m. And then Thursday, April 3rd, chamber lunch and learn, Alzheimer's roundtable. Contact the chamber at 687-9885 for reservations. That's all I have this evening. Council reports. Gary?
Well, I got three things, I guess.
1 minute or less. I'm just
Yeah, I
kidding.
don't know if I could do one.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, I was here sitting there listening to your stuff for
I'm
about,
just kidding.
45 minutes. So I at least
I didn't
want
think I spoke
about an
that
hour
long.
in response to that. But in either case, I got three things that I mentioned before. One thing, before we report on Main Street and also Creative Arts District, as you remember, we did a resolution, the council supporting that and supporting the idea of appointing a council liaison to the two board of directors. Before I report on that, because I've been informally meeting at these meetings, I want to know if I can make that official, that you guys either appoint me or somebody else as council liaison to those board of directors. So that's the first thing. However you want to do that.
So you're looking for us to
Appoint someone?
a council liaison
Right.
for which board again?
Both, Creative Arts District and Main Street.
All right.
And I think it's appropriate for Councilman Rivetto to bring that to your attention this evening. Recall that we typically do those after elections as part of an agenda item. So I think it's okay that he raises it, but I would encourage you to wait till at least the next meeting, but perhaps until April 17th, when you reassign all the different extra duties that you have
Then
for
I
the
would suggest
different
putting it as
committees.
an agenda item for the
We would
17th.
include it along with the other appointments.
So I will informally report to you, I guess, what's happened on the board of as far as the board of directors of Main Street is concerned, we've been meeting weekly because we have an important assessment coming up from Downtown Colorado Inc. And that assessment's going to occur on the 31st of March. We have 4 focus groups. So we're working very busily to get those focus groups organized and doing what we need to do in order to accommodate the Downtown Colorado Inc., which is the outfit that's consultant to Doler, essentially, that does the assessment for us and assesses the community and assesses what our future will perhaps be based on the input from the residents of the community. 4 focus groups recognize basically focus groups for different organizations within Woodland Park, the business communities. We try to get everybody represented, and we do. The one that most of you would be concerned with, the thousands of people are watching on the cable network, and those who will ever tune into YouTube, I want to give them the opportunity because we do have the public focus group on the 31st of March at 7 o'clock in the Cultural Center. And I encourage anybody that wants to have their input, considered in this focus group to really attend that meeting. We do have names of people that we already know who are going to come to that 7 o'clock meeting. but I'm encouraging everybody who's interested, they want to have a voice in the future of Woodland Park, to certainly be there. The following night, that DCI is going to give us the results of their assessment. And that's going to tell us, based on their assessment, where we're going in the future in Woodland Park. So that'll be the following night. I believe it's at 7 o'clock. So things are plugging along. We've got a really exciting board of directors in that group. We've got about 10 people on the board of directors in there. They're each very accomplished individuals, and they're excited, and they're moving ahead as fast as they can on this thing. Now that's Main Street. I'm trying not to get too excited here because I had complaints before that I get too excited about these things. So I'll try to tone it down a little bit. The Creative Arts District. I got some stuff to report on that. We do have 10 members on the board of directors of the Creative Arts District. Once again, much like the Main Street program, each one of those individuals have credentials that you'd be extremely impressed with. But more important, these people are very, very motivated to get this Creative Arts District established. We submitted our letter of intent to the organization who makes the evaluation and ultimately approves people to be a Creative Arts District, and that's Colorado.
Creative Industries.
Huh?
Creative Industries.
Yeah, Colorado Creative Industries, which is a division of the Department of Economic Development, Colorado Department of Economic Development and International Trade. This is a very competitive process, folks. In this letter of intent, there were 22 communities that applied for that. Colorado Springs is one, Manitoba Springs is the other. And Colorado Springs has been turned down once before. They've reissued to submit. Out of the 22, 11 got an invite to go through the rest of the process. In other words, do what they need to do to do the application in order to be assessed that. Out of those 11 people, actually 5 will be chosen to be a potential creative arts industry district, if you will. But it takes 2 years for them to do that. But I want to give you guys, I don't want to bore you too much, but I want to give you the level of effort that these folks are going to have to do in 2 months in order to have their application processed. And I just want to mention this because I want you to know the level of effort we have to go through when we do this. They evaluate these districts based on a number of criteria. Here's the characteristics. 1, specific identified district boundaries. That's not a problem. Arts and creative industry is a key organization principle for the district. Hub of economic activity with mix of business and venues. They got to put all this stuff together. Regularly scheduled arts and cultural events, art, music, heritage festivals, art walks. That's all got to be identified and put together. Identify that has already been or can be branded. Evidence that the community already considers this a creative arts district. In other words, we haven't gone through the process of creating a district, creative arts district. We're doing that now with this motivated board. But other communities have done that. They've already established a creative arts district that have been formally designated by Downtown Colorado Inc. or Colorado Creative Industries, but they've already done this for a year. We haven't done that yet. Evidence community already considers incorporation of an area, culture, heritage, and uniqueness. Projects and or built environment that indicate ongoing revitalization and beautification. We do some of that, but we've got to document all this stuff and put all this stuff together. Another thing, a designated individual with a paid staff or formally appointed unpaid volunteers, such as a board chair who coordinates district planning, management, marketing, funding, and evaluations. One of the reasons why I brought up the concept of having an administrator to you guys, because that's what's required. A diverse steering committee or board reflecting local government, for-profit business, non-profit business, and artists, creative entrepreneurs. This consists of that group. We already have that group. Artists, creative entrepreneurs, and visible leadership roles. We've got that. A manager or business plan that includes marketing strategies, funding strategies, and a vision that includes measurable expected impact, such as attraction, retention of creative business and jobs, improve retail sales, and enhance streetscape. Takes a lot to put that together. Formal commitment by local government is evidenced by inclusion in economic development plan, community master plan, or neighborhood plan, or by resolution or ordinance. We've done that. That's why we had that ordinance approved, that resolution, if you will. Method for collecting data on jobs, occupancy, visitors, sales of property tax, and other expected impacts. It's a major effort to do that. Active involvement and investment in the district by local governments such as leadership and planning by the council, assistance in funding and management by the municipal agency, creation of local tax incentives. We're not going to do that, but that's why I asked for the funding opportunities. Broad participation by people and organizations within the district is demonstrated by membership dues, event execution, event attendance, media coverage, or retail sales. Programs and events that attract participate in both local residents and tourists. And it goes on and on and on, okay? Well, the encouraging thing to us is that Colorado Creative Industries have thought so much about our letter of invitation. Although we were not selected as one of the 11, they did something very unique for us, which has never been done before. And they were so impressed with our letter that they want to actually be involved in the process with us by doing a site visit, giving us expertise and consulting expertise at no fee at all. They want us to be a creative arts district. So they're doing everything they can to be with us to help us through this process. So there's a lot of work to be done. The good thing is, if we had gotten selected as an invitee, we would have had to do all this stuff in 2 months. We got a breather now, so it's a mixed blessing. You know, although we didn't get accepted as an invitee, we have 2 years in which to do all that stuff now. In the meantime, we will create a creative arts district, which is one of the requirements that they have there. We want to go for success. So out of the 11 people, only 5 get chosen, really. We want to be one of those 5 when this comes up next time. We want to guarantee success. And the way to do that is we're fortunate that Colorado Creative Industries is going to come and help us with this process now. So I think that's really good, encouraging news for us. And once again, the board of directors is very motivated to make this happen. And we're talking about the creative arts community. Why is it important to us? The creative arts community is an asset that we have that's critical to our economic development. And it's going to be a blessing that we get this creative arts district established, that we will have that opportunity and that tool for city manager to use to be able to increase our economic development within Woodland Park. So that's the news I wanted to share with you on Main Street and Creative Arts District. The last thing I wanted to share with you is that, I talked to Dave about this. I'm running as a writing candidate for mayor. And the reason why I'm doing this is not to run against anybody, is just to give people a choice. I think the thing that I'm proud of the fact that Ken, John, and all over here stepped up to the plate and volunteered to be a candidate for the various council positions here. And thank goodness they did, because if they didn't, then we wouldn't have anybody running. But what I want to do is I want to be able to encourage and motivate other people out there in the community to get involved. I believe the citizens deserve choice. And by having people unopposed, that doesn't give them any choice. So that wouldn't even give them a reason to vote. So I'm only running in order to give people a choice. So being as a writing candidate, obviously, you got to write my name in. So, if you remember my name, then write it in. If you don't, then don't worry about it. But that's what I had to share with you guys. And that's about all I have to report.
How do you spell Brovetto?
I don't know. By the way, I was told by Suzanne that I don't think you have to even spell it right now, right? I think you put just GB, or because nobody can spell Brovetto, can they? B-R-O-V-E-T-T-O. It's hard,
You just spell it S-M-I-T-H.
You want to run? You can run. Why didn't you put your name in?
No.
But I believe in giving people a choice, and I believe more in motivating those out there. We need new faces, motivating all the people in the community to step up to the plate the next time we have an election. And God, put your name in the hat, Let's get involved.
What's wrong with old faces?
Well, it's good to have old faces here to get the historical knowledge of what's going on. But we need some new faces too to forge ahead. And I think that would be encouraging. I think everybody, should serve their community in some form or fashion. And a good way to serve, obviously, is to run for elected positions. Once again, only to be able to give people really a choice out there. I hate to have people say, yeah, we chose a mayor, but we had no choice. I'd like to do that for all the council members, but we don't have any choice. So the only thing I could do is just throw my name in that and say, okay, you guys got a choice, so that you can't say that you didn't have a choice.
Well, maybe everybody thinks we're doing a great job.
Good.
I don't know. Bob?
Nothing.
All right. Carol? John?
Nothing.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Aaron?
I have nothing.
You have nothing. All right. David?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
All right. I have no comments on written correspondence, so the time is 8:45 and we are adjourned.